Welcome to our deep dive into the mystery of Imam Mahdi. We're going to be sifting through a mountain of Islamic texts and scholarly interpretations, trying to uncover the truth about this enigmatic figure.
You've probably encountered a lot of different narratives and prophecies out there, making it kind of tough to separate fact from fiction.
It really is. But that's exactly what we're here for. In this deep dive, we're going to be drawing primarily from the work of Islamic scholars known as muhaddisin, to help you get a clearer, more concise and evidence-based understanding. Get ready for some surprising truths.
Yeah, the Muhaddisin are really fascinating. What makes them so important is their incredibly rigorous method for evaluating the authenticity of hadith. These are the sayings and actions attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. It's not just about accepting any story at face value.
So they're like meticulous detectives of Islamic history.
Exactly. They scrutinize chains of narration, meaning they trace the hadith back through a series of narrators to ensure its connection to the Prophet Muhammad. They examine the character and reliability of each narrator in the chain, looking for any signs of bias or weakness, and they verify the historical accuracy of the hadith, making sure it aligns with established facts.
That's so fascinating. Could you give us an example of how they might apply these methods in practice?
Absolutely. Let's say we have a hadith about a specific event in the Prophet's life. The Muhaddisin would first look at who narrated the hadith, tracing it all the way back to its source. They would then examine each narrator's reputation, looking at their honesty, their memory, and their adherence to Islamic principles. If any narrator was known to be unreliable, or if there were gaps or inconsistencies in the chain of narration, the hadith would be considered weak.
So they're really trying to make sure that the information is as accurate and reliable as possible.
Precisely. And this rigorous approach is especially important when we're dealing with a figure like Imam Mahdi, who has been the subject of so many prophecies and interpretations.
That makes a lot of sense. So how have the muhaddisin helped to clarify our understanding of Imam Mahdi?
Well, it might surprise you to learn that while there are many narrations about Imam Mahdi out there, the vast majority are actually considered weak or fabricated by the Muhaddisin. In fact, only 7 narrations meet their stringent criteria for authenticity. We're talking Sahih, meaning sound, or Hassan, meaning good. In contrast, Mawzu denotes fabricated narrations that don't meet these standards.
Wow, 7 out of hundreds. That's quite a revelation. What do these 7 authentic narrations actually tell us about Imam Mahdi?
These narrations all come from 4 companions of the Prophet Muhammad: Abu Sa'id Khudri, Jabir bin Abdullah, Abu Huraira, and Abdullah bin Masud. And they paint a picture of a just and generous ruler emerging in the last days, or possibly a period closer to the Prophet's time.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily a prediction of a figure appearing centuries later.
Exactly. The narrations focus on qualities and actions. They describe this ruler distributing wealth without even counting, establishing justice and bringing prosperity. They even mention physical attributes like a wide forehead and a high nose, but what's striking is the absence of supernatural qualities, or any claim of a divine mandate.
And they don't explicitly mention Imam Mahdi by name.
Right. There's only one narration that actually does, and it's found in the Mustadrak Hikakim, a collection that's not considered as authoritative as Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, because its chain of narrations isn't as rigorously vetted.
So if these narrations don't explicitly mention Imam Mahdi, where does that name and the concept come from?
Well, the term Mahdi simply means guided. It was a term used for the rightly guided caliphs and other just rulers throughout Islamic history.
So it was more of a title, not necessarily a specific individual's name.
Precisely. And that's where things get really interesting. You see, these authentic narrations describing a just and generous ruler could easily be referring to someone like Umar bin Abdul Aziz.
Umar bin Abdulaziz, the caliph known for his piety and good governance. You're saying he could have fulfilled these prophecies?
It's definitely a compelling argument. His reign really embodied the characteristics described in the Hadith, focusing on justice, generosity, and prosperity. This leads us to 2 approaches to understanding the Mahdi. The scholarly approach prioritizes rigorous scrutiny of Hadith, focusing on the Quran and Sunnah, and avoids forming beliefs based on weak or fabricated narrations. The popular approach, on the other hand, often starts with pre-existing beliefs about Imam Mahdi and seeks to confirm those beliefs, sometimes even by selectively interpreting or ignoring hadith, which can lead to accepting weaker narrations.
So it's really important to be aware of these different levels of authenticity and to critically evaluate the information that we're presented with.
Absolutely. That's what makes the work of the Muhaddisin so incredibly valuable. They provide us with a framework for understanding the strength of various narrations and encourage us to approach religious knowledge with a critical and discerning mind.
This is already shedding a new light on my understanding of Imam Mahdi. What stands out to you in all this?
You know what's fascinating to me is that even with the meticulous work of the Muhaddisin, there are still different interpretations and perspectives within the scholarly community. Some scholars prioritize a stricter standard of authenticity, while others might be a bit more lenient. And this difference in approach can significantly impact how they understand a figure like Imam Mahdi.
That raises a really important question. How did this concept of Imam Mahdi, as it's popularly understood today, actually come about? And how much of it is based on those rigorously authenticated sources? To find out, we'll need to delve into the historical and political context. And that's exactly where we're headed next.
You know, it's fascinating how an idea like the Mahdi, which isn't explicitly detailed in the Quran or in the most highly regarded hadith collections, gained such traction and evolved over time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What was happening historically that might have influenced the development of these narratives?
Well, you have to consider the context. After the Prophet Muhammad's death, the Muslim community faced considerable uncertainty and turmoil. There were disputes over leadership, political upheavals, and a general longing for a return to a time of justice and unity. And it's during those times of trouble, that people often look for hope in prophecies of a savior figure.
It makes sense when faced with difficult circumstances. The promise of a leader who will come and set things right, it can be very appealing.
Exactly. And remember, the transmission of hadith wasn't a perfectly controlled process. As these stories were passed down orally and eventually written down, there was always room for embellishment, changes in emphasis, even the insertion of personal interpretations. It's not that people were deliberately making things up, but the process of transmission itself could have led to changes in the narratives over time.
So the stories might have evolved organically as they were passed down through generations.
Precisely. And then you also have to factor in the political dynamics at play. Different groups might have projected their own hopes and agendas onto the figure of the Mahdi, using the prophecies to legitimize their claims or to inspire their followers.
So the concept of the Mahdi could have been used as a political tool.
Yes. Throughout history, there have been individuals who claimed to be the Mahdi, or were proclaimed as such by their supporters. These movements often arose during periods of political instability or social unrest, tapping into that yearning for a righteous leader.
That's interesting. So as these movements gained momentum, did the narrative surrounding the Mahdi also change?
Oh, absolutely. As these movements gained traction, the stories often became more elaborate, incorporating supernatural elements, miraculous events, even cosmic battles against evil. The figure of the Mahdi, initially described as a just and generous ruler, could be transformed into something more extraordinary, almost superhuman.
It sounds like the historical and political context played a significant role in shaping the popular understanding of Imam Mahdi.
Indeed, it's a fascinating example of how religious narratives can evolve and be reinterpreted in response to social and political pressures. And this evolution didn't happen overnight. It unfolded over centuries, with each generation adding its own layer of understanding and interpretation.
That makes me wonder, if the traditional narratives surrounding Imam Mahdi are largely based on weaker narrations or later interpretations, how should we approach this topic today, especially when it comes to the idea of a savior figure coming to restore justice and unity, which seems to resonate across cultures and religions?
I think it underscores the importance of critical thinking, historical awareness, and a willingness to engage with the sources directly. We can't just passively accept any story or interpretation we come across. We have a responsibility to examine the evidence, to understand the historical context, and to form our own informed conclusions.
So it's not just about accepting what we've been told, but actively seeking a deeper understanding.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that there isn't just one monolithic Islamic view on the Mahdi. Even within the scholarly community, there are diverse perspectives and ongoing debates about the authenticity of various narrations and the nature of the Mahdi's role.
That's a really important point. It reminds us that even within a shared faith, there can be a spectrum of interpretations. It's so easy to just get caught up in those popular narratives, especially when they're tied to something as significant as faith.
Yeah, absolutely. We often gravitate towards information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs aren't fully grounded in the most reliable sources. And that's where the work of the Muhaddisin becomes so crucial. They don't just provide us with a framework for evaluating the authenticity of hadith, they also model a critical and discerning approach to religious knowledge.
So they're not just saying, hey, here's the truth, take it or leave it. They're saying, here's how we arrived at this understanding, question it, challenge it, do your own research.
Exactly. They understood that true knowledge requires intellectual effort. and a willingness to engage with different perspectives.
That's so empowering. It reminds us that Islam encourages a pursuit of knowledge, not blind faith. But it also presents a bit of a challenge, right? What happens when the knowledge we gain challenges our deeply held beliefs? What if someone has grown up believing a certain narrative about Imam Mahdi, and now they're discovering that the most authentic sources might not fully support that narrative?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important not to feel threatened or discouraged. It's natural to question and grapple with your beliefs as you learn more. I'd say embrace that process of intellectual and spiritual growth.
Yeah, it's not about abandoning faith. It's about deepening your understanding
Yeah.
by engaging with the complexities.
Exactly. And remember, there's a difference between the core tenets of faith and interpretations of specific prophecies. The belief in a future time of justice and divine guidance is a powerful and inspiring concept that resonates across many faiths.
It really does.
Yeah.
It taps into that universal human longing for a better world.
Yes. And how we understand that concept, whether through the figure of Imam Mahdi or other prophecies, is something that can continue to evolve as we learn and grow.
You know, this deep dive has really highlighted the importance of approaching religious knowledge with both humility and an open mind. It's been fascinating to explore the figure of Imam Mahdi, uncovering the layers of interpretation and the historical and political forces that have shaped our understanding.
It has. It's a journey of discovery that invites us to question, to research, and to constantly seek a deeper understanding.
Absolutely. Well, let's leave our listeners with this final thought. If the traditional narratives surrounding Imam Mahdi are not as strongly supported by the most authentic sources as we might have thought, what does this tell us about the process of forming and transmitting religious beliefs over time? It's a question that encourages us to approach our faith with a sense of curiosity and critical thinking.
It really is. And it reminds us that even within a shared faith, there can be a spectrum of understanding and interpretation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Imam Mahdi. It's been an enlightening journey. And we encourage you to continue your own exploration, equipped with the knowledge and critical thinking skills we've